At 7:30 in the morning, my alarm clock rang shrilly. I reached for the phone and turned it off. 5 more minutes, and I was already standing under the shower, washing away the remnants of sleep with cool water. An ordinary morning of an ordinary day. I didn't know then that this was one of my last days at Michigan Greens. My name is Aiden Farquhar, and for 3 years now I've been a full-time translator for a regional chain of health food stores. It was once a small company with 5 stores in Michigan, but now it's a growing chain with ambitions to enter the Asian market. That's why they hired me, a guy who knows Japanese and Korean. The Michigan Greens office was in a glass building on the edge of town. It was nothing special, a typical Class B business center with a little worn carpeting in the hallways and a perpetually broken coffee machine. I parked in my usual spot, nodded to Paul, the security guard, and headed up to the 4th floor. "Hey, Aiden!" Orson Niven, the purchasing analyst and my only real friend at the company, called out to me. "Have you seen the new directive from Thorne Abbott, the new CEO who came in 2 months ago, a man with impeccable suits and an icy stare?" The previous CEO, Margaret Summers, had retired, and the board had decided the company needed fresh blood to grow aggressively. "Not yet," I answered, hanging up my jacket. "What is it this time?" "A 30% cut in the budget for corporate events," Orson grimaced. "Looks like there won't be a Christmas party this year." I shrugged. "I'm more worried about that meeting with the Koreans next week. Did you see the translation that marketing did for the presentation?" "No. Why?" "They used Google Translate." I couldn't contain my irritation. "The name of our organic line has a play on words that sounds like, let's just say, an obscene sentence." "But you fixed it, didn't you?" Orson raised an eyebrow. "Of course I did. I had to stay 2 hours late yesterday to redo the whole presentation. It was a typical example of my job. Not only did I translate documents and business correspondence, but I often acted as a cultural consultant. The Asian market is full of pitfalls for Western companies. The wrong color scheme on packaging, a bad translation of a slogan, or careless use of symbols. And instead of a successful deal, you get perplexed or even insulted partners. My workplace was a small desk by the window, no partitions, an open space policy to encourage communication, as HR manager Kirsty Waits used to say. On the desk was a computer, a notepad, and a small bamboo fox figurine, a gift from a Japanese partner, Mr. Tanaka, with whom I had helped to negotiate the first organic tea contract. I turned on my computer and checked my email first thing. 3 new emails needed translation, a specification for a new line of algae supplements from a Korean supplier, a request from a Japanese distributor to bring our products to Hokkaido Prefecture, and a letter asking about certification from a potential partner in Taiwan. The translator's usual day began. By 11 o'clock, I had finished translating the specifications and sent the document to the quality control department. Just as I was about to start the next letter, Jenny from sales called out to me. "Aiden, do you have a minute? I need help with a letter for Jung Min Ho." Jung Min Ho was the CEO of Co Green, Korea's largest distributor of organic products, a potential partner with whom Michigan Greens plan to sign a major contract next week, a contract that could open up the entire Korean market for the company. "Sure." I walked over to Jenny's desk. "What exactly do you need?" "I want to send him an invitation to dinner after the negotiations. Is that okay? Won't it be taken wrong in some way?" I looked at the draft of the letter she had composed. "First of all, it's better to address him as Mr. Jeong instead of Mr. Min Ho. In Korea, the last name comes first, then the first name. Second, a business dinner is a good idea, but it's better to organize it in a traditional Korean restaurant, not a steakhouse as you suggest. And third, you should not jump straight to informal socializing. Koreans really value hierarchy and formality." Jenny took careful notes of my recommendations. "Thank you, Aiden. You're a real treasure. I don't know how we deal with these Asians without you." I cringed a little at the word Asians, but didn't say anything. Jenny didn't mean to offend anyone. She just didn't understand the cultural subtleties. Back at my desk, I noticed a new letter in the mail from Thorne Abbott, a general, office-wide mailing. "Dear colleagues, just a reminder that there will be a general meeting of the entire staff in Conference Room A at 14 o'clock. Attendance is mandatory. Sincerely, Thorne Abbott." The meetings initiated by Abbott never boded well. Since his arrival, every such event had ended with a new optimization measure: cutting budgets, eliminating bonuses, or firing ineffective employees. At 14 o'clock, the conference room was full. Thorne Abbott stood at the projector, dressed in an immaculate navy blue suit. His thin lips were pressed into a straight line, and his blonde hair was perfectly styled. "Good afternoon, colleagues," he began without preamble. "As you know, Michigan Greens is on the cusp of a major change. Our goal is to expand internationally, especially in Asia. To achieve this goal, we need to optimize costs and increase efficiency." I glanced over to Orson. We both knew what would follow those words. "Having audited all departments, we have identified a number of redundant positions and functions," Abbott continued, switching slides with charts and graphs. "Over the next week, some positions will be cut and duties will be redistributed among the remaining staff. We are also implementing new technology solutions to automate routine processes." A slide appeared on the screen listing these technology solutions. Among them was implementation of a system of automatic translation of documents and correspondence. My heart skipped a beat. This was a clear implication that my position was in jeopardy. I looked at Kirsty from HR sitting in the front row. She met my gaze for a second and immediately averted her eyes. Not a good sign. After the meeting, the office buzzed like a disturbed beehive. Everyone was discussing who would be affected by the layoffs. I went back to my desk and tried to concentrate on translating the letter from Taiwan, but my mind kept returning to Abbott's words. The next 3 days passed in tense anticipation. Periodically, one of his colleagues would receive an invitation to Kirsty's office and return with a devastated look and a box of personal belongings. By Friday, 7 people had been fired. On Monday, I discovered that the translation of another email from the Korean partners had not been assigned to me, but to David, the marketing guy, who had simply run the text through Google Translate. The result was predictably awful. The translation contained inaccuracies in terminology and even phrases that could be perceived as disrespectful. "David, why didn't you send that email to me?" I asked when I got to the marketing department. "Orders from above," he shrugged. "Abbott said to use automatic translation for all standard correspondence. Your services are now only for special occasions." On Tuesday, the situation repeated itself with documentation for Japanese suppliers. On Wednesday, I discovered that I had been removed from the mailing list for preparations for my meeting with Jong Min-ho. By Thursday, I was waiting for the inevitable. It came at 16:30 when an invitation to meet with Thorne Abbott and Kirsty Waits at 17 o'clock arrived in my mail. Abbott's office was minimalist. A desk, 3 chairs, a computer, and an abstract painting on the wall, the only bright spot in the monochromatic interior. Kirsty sat beside him holding a folder of documents. Her normally lively face looked tense. "Have a seat, Mr. Farquhar," Abbott said without getting up. I sat down across from them, keeping outwardly calm, though inside I was seething. "Mr. Farquhar," Abbott began, folding his hands in front of him. "As part of our streamlining of the company structure, we've been forced to cut a number of positions, including that of full-time translator. As of tomorrow, your services will no longer be required by Michigan Greens. Even though I was expecting it, the words still hit me over the head. "May I know the reason?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Purely economic," Abbott shrugged. "It costs the company a lot of money to maintain a full-time translator. Today's machine translation systems are advanced enough for our needs. I don't need regular translators in the company, even Google Translate can handle it." I looked at Kirsty. She was staring at the desk, avoiding my gaze. "Miss Waits will explain the details of the severance package and other formalities," Abbott continued, clearly considering the conversation over. "You can collect your things for the rest of the day." I took a deep breath. I should have remained professional until the end. "Mr. Abbott," I said, deliberately using the formal Korean address, "I understand you have an important meeting with Co. Green on Monday." "That's right," he nodded with slight bewilderment. "And you plan to use automatic translation for negotiations." "We have professional software and will outsource translation if necessary," Abbott said. "That's not your concern, Mr. Farquhar." I stood up and smiled. "Good luck with your next meeting. You'll need it." Abbott's face flashed with irritation, but he quickly regained his composure. "Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Farquhar. Kirsty, show him out, please." In the hallway, Kirsty finally looked at me. "I'm sorry, Aiden. I tried to explain to him the importance of your work, but the decision was made at board level. They want to cut costs before entering the Asian market." "Ironic, isn't it?" I chuckled. "Saving on something that could cost them the entire contract." "What did you mean when you wished him luck?" she asked quietly. "Just that without an understanding of the cultural nuances and accurate translation, this meeting might not go the way they plan." I shrugged. "Korean business is built on relationships and mutual respect. One mistranslated phrase, one missed ritual, and the deal is off." Kirsty turned pale. "Maybe we should warn him." "He won't listen." I shook my head. "Some lessons are learned through experience." We reached my desk and I started packing. I put the bamboo fox in my jacket pocket and the rest of the stuff fit into a small box. 3 years of work and all that was left of them fit into a shoebox-sized cardboard box. Orson came up to me as I was ready to leave. "I've been told, shit, Aiden, I'm so sorry." "It's okay." I clapped him on the shoulder. "That's life. I'll be looking for a new job." "What about the Korean contract? You're the only one who really knows how to communicate with them." "That's not my problem anymore," I smiled. But in the back of my mind, I felt uneasy. Michigan Greens wasn't just a place to work. It was a project I had put my soul into. I had helped the company take its first steps into the international market, and now it could all come crashing down because of the new management's short-sightedness. I walked out of the building into the cool evening air, carrying a box of my belongings. Behind me was the company preparing for crucial negotiations, unaware of the disaster that could await it on Monday. The first night after being fired proved to be sleepless. I lay in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, my mind reeling from the phrases Abbott had said. "I don't need regular translators. Google Translate will handle it." Arrogance and incomprehension concentrated into a few words. I knew he was wrong, but that didn't make it any easier. In the morning, when the sun had barely begun to rise above the horizon, I got out of bed, brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a box of stuff I'd brought from the office. A bamboo fox mascot given by Tanaka-san. A few notebooks with notes on the cultural peculiarities of doing business in Japan and Korea. A picture of our department taken at last year's corporate party. Me standing next to Orson, both of us smiling. Kirsty shows the peace sign above my head with her fingers. Little shards of 3 years of life. My phone vibrates. A message from Orson. "How are you? Want to meet up after work?" I replied, "I'm fine. Let's do the Blue Bar at 7. Staring at the phone, I thought about the strangeness of the situation. For the first time in 3 years, I had no reason to rush, to plan my day, to prepare for work tasks, emptiness and freedom at the same time. I decided not to waste time on self-pity and started looking for a new job. I updated my resume, looked at job openings on specialized websites. There were a lot of Korean and Japanese translators needed, but most of the vacancies were either freelance or contract work. There were practically no permanent positions. I sent applications to a few suitable options and decided to take a walk. Sitting at home and thinking about quitting would be the worst way to spend the day. Michigan greeted me with a cool spring breeze. I walked down familiar streets, absent-mindedly noting store signs, many of which had inscriptions in multiple languages. The city was becoming more and more international, which meant that the need for people who understood not only the language but also the culture of other countries was bound to grow. At least I hoped so. In the park near my home, I sat down on a bench and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through my contacts. Many of them were work-related. Clients, partners, co-workers. Should I have informed them of my termination? Or would it look like an attempt to use work connections for personal gain? In the end, I decided to send short messages only to those with whom I had developed really friendly relationships. Those turned out to be few. Orson, of course, 3 other colleagues at Michigan Greens, and Mr. Tanaka from Japan, with whom we occasionally corresponded about literature and movies. Dear Mr. Tanaka, I have to inform you that I am no longer working at Michigan Greens. I hope this will not interfere with our personal communication. Sincerely, Aiden Farquhar. The reply came surprisingly quickly. Dear Farquhar-san, I am saddened to hear this news. If you need a reference or assistance in finding a new job, please let me know. A company that doesn't value employees like you is dooming itself to failure. His words lifted my spirits a bit. At least people who truly understood the value of cross-cultural communication appreciated my skills. At 7 in the evening, I met Orson at the Blue Bar, a small establishment near the Michigan Greens office where we sometimes gathered after work. Orson was already waiting for me at a table in the corner, a bottle of beer in front of him. You look lousy, he said instead of greeting me. Thanks for the compliment, I grinned, sitting down across from him. I just didn't sleep well. The waiter came over and I ordered a beer too. We sat in silence until he brought my order. So, what's going on at the office? I finally asked. Orson shook his head. It's chaos. Abbott is running around like a madman, demanding all the materials for the Koreans by Sunday. Marketing is redoing the presentation for the 3rd time because each translation is worse than the last. They're using Google Translate? Yes, and some new program that Abbott bought for a lot of money. Honestly, the results are terrible. Jenny tried to explain to him that the translation was wrong, but he just dismissed it. Computers don't make mistakes, unlike humans. I sipped my beer, feeling a mixture of irritation and strange satisfaction. What about the preparations for the meeting? I asked. Had anyone explained to him the peculiarities of Korean etiquette? Kirsty tried to say something about the order of greetings and the exchange of business cards, but he considers it unnecessary ceremonies. He said, "Business is business in any country." I couldn't help but laugh. What? Orson raised an eyebrow. Nothing. It's just amazing how a man with such experience can be so short-sighted. You know these negotiations are very important to the company, right? If the contract falls through, I know, I interrupted him. But that's not my problem, is it? I was fired. Orson looked at me carefully. Do you really think so, or are you just hurt? I sighed and leaned back in my chair. Of course I'm hurt, Orson. I've put 3 years of my life into this company. Remember when we made that first presentation to the Japanese? I didn't sleep for a week, reworking all the materials, explaining to everyone in the marketing department why you can't use certain colors and symbols, why it's important to address your partners in the right order. I remember, Orson nodded. You were the only one who really understood what you were doing. And now, Abbott thinks a computer program will replace all that, not just translating words, but understanding the context, the culture, the mentality. We stopped talking. The waiter brought us a second bottle of beer. "How did you become a translator in the first place?" Orson asked after a pause. "You've never told me much about yourself." I grinned. "No special story. Born to a school teacher and a truck driver. Ordinary childhood in the suburbs of Detroit. Started getting interested in Japanese culture in high school. Anime, manga, that sort of thing. Typical teenage geek, something like that. But I decided not to stop watching subtitled cartoons and started learning the language. First with textbooks from the library, then I found online courses. By senior year, I could read simple texts and hold a basic conversation." "Impressive," Orson nodded respectfully. "Not really. The real challenge started when I decided to go to college. My parents didn't have any money and I didn't get a scholarship, so I had to work. I got a job as a courier for a food delivery service and started moonlighting as a translator for a local travel agency. It paid pennies, but it was an experience. And Korean. Korean was an accident. In college, I met a guy from Seoul, Jin Ho. We became roommates and he suggested that I help him with English and he helps me with Korean. After 2 years, I could speak it fluently, and after 4 years, I could read and write it fluently. I took a sip of beer and continued. After college, I worked for several companies, mostly on temporary contracts. I translated technical documents, accompanied delegations, and helped with negotiations. And then I saw a job opening at Michigan Greens. They were just starting to enter the Asian market and were looking for a translator with knowledge of Korean and Japanese. And 3 years later, I'm fired because Google Translate can't handle it, I finished for him. Orson shook his head. Damn stupid of them, especially now when the company is on the verge of a major deal. That's the point. Machine translation can be useful for understanding the overall meaning of a text, but it doesn't pick up the nuances, especially in languages like Korean, where so much depends on context, on the relationship between interlocutors, on cultural sensitivities. I pulled out my phone and opened Google Translate. See, here's a simple phrase in Korean. "Ijenal jiomtohai jusyeoseo gamsahabnida." Thank you for considering our offer. That's the correct translation, right? Orson nodded. Now let's add just one word. Ijenul jiomtohai jusyeoseo jongmal gamsahabnida. We sincerely appreciate you considering our offer. Feel the difference? The first option can sound formal and even cold. The second expresses real appreciation, but to a machine, it's just a bunch of words. I see, Orson said, but can't you program a computer to take such nuances into account? Theoretically, yes. Practically, it would require not just knowledge of the language, but an understanding of the culture, the context, the relationships between people. Artificial intelligence has not yet reached such a level, especially when it comes to business negotiations, where every word counts. We ordered another bottle of beer and the conversation moved on to other topics. Orson told me about the latest office gossip, about how Jenny had almost gotten into a fight with David over the printer, and how Abbott had beaten up the marketing department for a typo in a promotional booklet. I got home around 11 p.m., slightly tipsy and with conflicting feelings. On the one hand, talking to Orson reminded me why I love my job. On the other, it made quitting even more bitter. Before going to bed, I checked my email. 3 automated responses to resume sent. The standard, "Thank you for your interest in our company. We'll consider you for a position." And 1 personal message from Kirsty Waits. "Aiden, hope you're doing well. Just wanted to say I'm really sorry to hear about this. You were a great employee and an important part of the team. If you need a reference or help finding a job, let me know. Kirsty." I stared at the screen for a few minutes, not knowing what to reply. Finally, I wrote, "Thanks, Kirsty, I'm fine. Already started looking for a new job. How are the preparations for the meeting with the Koreans going? The reply came almost instantly, as if she'd been sitting at her computer waiting for my message. To be honest, not great. Abbott's got everyone using the new translation program, but the results are questionable. No one is sure if the materials really convey what we want to say. Maybe we should outsource a translator, I suggested. Abbott refuses, says he's already spent a lot of money on software and isn't going to pay for a translator as well. Besides, according to him, machines don't make mistakes. I shook my head. Abbott's stubbornness could cost the company dearly. Well, I wish you luck. I hope everything goes well, I wrote, not having much faith in my own words. Thanks. By the way, could you take a look at one document? It's the draft contract we plan to offer to the Koreans. I'm worried that there might be mistakes in there. I hesitated to answer. On the one hand, I had been fired, and I had no obligation to help the company. On the other hand, I still felt responsible for the project I'd put so much effort into. And I didn't want to offend Kirsty by saying no. Okay, send it, I finally wrote. A minute later, an email arrived with a file attached. I opened the document and started reading. The first paragraph made me cringe. The translation was literal, without context or the formalities of Korean business communication. It only got worse from there. I spent 2 hours highlighting the most problematic parts and adding comments. Not rewriting the text completely. After all, I no longer worked at Michigan Greens, but pointing out the most egregious errors. Thank you so much, Aiden. You're a real lifesaver, Kirsty replied when I sent her the comment document. I'm not sure Abbott will accept my edits, I wrote. I will find a way to make them without attracting his attention. That was the end of our correspondence, and I finally went to bed. Despite my fatigue, sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, thinking about Michigan Greens, about the contract with the Koreans, about my future. At one point, I almost decided to call Abbott and offer my freelance services to prepare for the meeting, but pride wouldn't let me. Friday morning, I was awakened by a call, an unfamiliar number. Aiden Farquhar, a man's voice asked. Yes, that's me. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm from Global Connections. We have received your resume and would like to invite you for an interview. Would you be available at 4 o'clock this afternoon? Global Connections was a small import-export company specializing in electronics from Asia. Not Michigan Greens, of course, but it looked like an encouraging start to the job search. Yeah, sure, I replied. I'll be at your place at 14 o'clock. My mood improved after the call. I took a shower, had breakfast, and decided to spend the time I had left before the interview preparing. I explored the Global Connections website, read reviews of the company, and looked up news about the electronics market in Asia. At 13 o'clock, just as I was about to leave the house, I got a text from Orson. Abbott is furious. Found out the contract had been amended and he's taking the whole department to task. Kirsty took the fire, said it was her initiative. What did he do? I asked. Canceled all the edits and returned the original translation. Said he wouldn't allow his decisions to be sabotaged. I cursed aloud. Abbott's stubbornness bordered on stupidity. How's Kirsty? Holding up, but I fear she may be the next victim of his optimization. I sent Kirsty a quick text with words of encouragement, but got no response. She was probably too busy dealing with the aftermath of Abbott's anger. The interview at Global Connections went well. Robert Hayes turned out to be a pleasant middle-aged man with a good understanding of the value of cross-cultural communication. He asked a few questions about my experience, checked my knowledge of Korean and Japanese, and discussed possible responsibilities. We can't offer you a full-time position right now, he said at the end, but we have an urgent project for 2 weeks involving Korean suppliers. If you perform well, we'll consider a permanent partnership. Not ideal, but better than nothing. I agreed and arranged to go to work on Monday. I spent all of Friday night and most of Saturday preparing for the new project. I studied the scope of global connections, repeated specialized terminology in Korean, and reviewed the latest market news. Saturday night, another message came from Orson. The Koreans are flying in tomorrow. Abbott has booked rooms for them at the Grand Hotel and organized a steakhouse dinner. Kirsty tried to explain to him that it's not the best choice, but he won't listen. I shook my head. A steakhouse is another mistake for Korean businessmen, many of whom prefer traditional cuisine, especially when traveling for business. Not critical, but telling. On Sunday, I tried not to think about Michigan greens and the upcoming negotiations. I went to the gym, met with a friend from college, watched a movie. But my thoughts kept returning to Abbott, Kirsty, Orson, and the Korean delegation that had probably already arrived in town. In the evening, while packing for my first day at my new job, I received a text message from an unknown number. I opened it and froze. The text was in Korean. 안녕하세요. Pakua si. Joneun kogrini jon muisa koe jun hoibnida. Nail misigan geurin sewa hoeyiga iseubnida. Hogsi sigani doesindamyeon, manaseo iyagihal su iseulgayo. Hello, Mr. Farquhar. I'm Choi Jun-ho, the executive director of Co-Green. I have a meeting with Michigan Greens tomorrow. If you have time, could we meet and talk? I reread the message twice, not believing my eyes. How did Choi Jun-ho get my number? And why would he want to meet me? A few seconds later, another message came. Tanaka-san gave me your contacts. He said you no longer work at Michigan Greens, but you might be willing to help with a transfer. That was it. Mr. Tanaka, with whom I shared the news of the layoff. He must have contacted the Korean partners. I thought long and hard about what to say. On the one hand, I was no longer working at Michigan Greens and had no obligation to help the company. On the other hand, it was a matter of professional ethics and reputation. In the end, I decided to agree to the meeting, if only to understand what Choi Jun-ho wanted. Manaseo iyagihal su isyubnida, eonje eodiseo manago sipeusingayo, I replied. We can meet and talk. When and where is convenient for you? Saturday morning greeted me with bright sunshine and uncertainty. It was strange to realize that for the first time in 3 years, I had nowhere to rush, no need to check work emails or prepare for meetings. Freedom I didn't ask for. After a cup of strong coffee, I sat down at my computer. It was time to get serious about finding a job. I opened several job sites, set up filters. Translator, Korean, Japanese, Michigan. The results were disappointing. Only 5 jobs, 3 of which were freelance. One that required me to move to Chicago, and only one that looked more or less suitable, Global Connections, where I was supposed to leave on Monday. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe I should have expanded the geography of my search, or consider related fields, not just translation, but international marketing or export operations, for example. After all, my skills went far beyond just translating texts. My phone vibrated. A message from Orson. Damn it, Aiden, you're not going to believe this. Abbott's got everyone working on Saturday to prepare for a crucial meeting. Guess who's rooting over documents that no one can translate properly? I grinned and replied, I sympathize. How's it going? Terrible. This state-of-the-art program is producing some gibberish. We're not even sure the Koreans will understand what we're talking about. And Abbott, pretty sure everything's perfect, said that technology doesn't fail, unlike humans. I think he just doesn't want to admit the mistake of firing you. I hummed. Pride and stubbornness are bad counselors in business. Hang in there, and good luck to you all on Monday. Thanks, we'll need it. I went back to my job search, but my thoughts kept returning to Michigan Greens. How's Kirsty doing? What's going on with the preparations for the meeting? Had the translation of the documents improved in any way? Shaking my head, I forced myself to focus. I updated my resume, emphasizing not only my translation skills but also my cultural understanding of business, international negotiation experience, and knowledge of the organic market. I applied for a few more jobs that even remotely matched my qualifications. After lunch, I decided to go for a walk. Sitting at home and thinking about my former job was counterproductive. The city greeted me with a cool breeze and the hustle and bustle of the weekend. I wandered along familiar streets looking at storefronts, cafes, and company offices. In one of the coffee shops, I noticed an Asian couple chatting animatedly over a laptop. They were speaking in Korean, and I listened. "I don't understand why they can't provide a proper translation," the man said. "We're a serious company, not some petty traders." "Maybe we should hire our own interpreter," suggested the woman, "or at least bring someone in for the duration of the negotiations." "Maybe you're right. Let's see what they have to offer at the meeting." I quickened my step, feeling strange. Were these Co-Green representatives preparing to negotiate with the Michigan Greens, or a mere coincidence? Either way, this was not my business, not mine anymore. When I got home, I found several automated responses to resumes I had sent and one personal email from a recruiter at a large technology company. She wondered if I would consider moving to Seattle, where there was an opening for an international communication specialist with knowledge of East Asian languages. Seattle, the other side of the country, a whole new life. Tempting, but intimidating. I replied that I was willing to discuss the opportunity, and we arranged a video interview the following week. I spent Saturday evening researching Global Connections, the company I was supposed to go to on Monday. A small firm that imports electronics from Asia, mostly South Korea and Taiwan. Founded 15 years ago, staff of about 30 people. Not Michigan Greens, of course, but perhaps my skills would be more appreciated here. Sunday began with a phone call. The number was unidentifiable. "Aiden Farquhar," I answered, still sleepy. "Mr. Farquhar, good morning. My name is Jong Jun Ho. I'm the CEO of Co-Green," came a voice with a distinctive Korean accent. I woke up instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Jong. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Tanaka from Japan gave me your contact. He said you no longer work at Michigan Greens, but you might be able to do us a favor. So that's what this is about." Mr. Tanaka decided to step in. "I really don't work there anymore," I replied cautiously. "I understand. We flew in yesterday and have a meeting with Michigan Greens management tomorrow. However, the documents they sent over are causing a little troubling. The translation leaves a lot to be desired. I'm sorry, but I don't see how I can help. We'd like to invite you as an independent translator to this meeting, on our end, of course. We'll pay you handsomely." I hesitated. The offer was unexpected and delicate. On the one hand, I needed the job. On the other hand, it could look like a small revenge on my former employer. "Mr. Jong, I appreciate the offer, but I'm afraid it would create an awkward situation. I only parted ways with Michigan Greens a few days ago. I understand your concerns, but understand us too. We are looking at a serious business partnership and we want to make sure there are no misunderstandings because of the language barrier. I can give you the contacts of several good translators who—" "Mr. Tanaka spoke very highly of your skills," Chan interrupted me. "He said you're not just a translator, but someone who really understands cultural nuances. That's exactly what we need. Flattery? Maybe. But there was truth in what he said. I was really proud of my understanding not only of the language, but also of the culture." "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Can I call you back later?" "Sure. I'll be waiting for your decision." After the conversation, I sat staring into space for a long time. Jung Jun Ho's offer was tempting, but something was stopping me. Pride? Ethics? Or just not wanting to face Abbott again? I decided to postpone the decision and go about my daily business. I went to the store, washed clothes, made dinner. That evening, I got a call from Robert Hayes at Global Connections. "Mr. Farquhar, I hope I'm not interrupting anything. No, it's fine. I just wanted to see if we're still on for you to come out tomorrow. Yes, of course. I'll be at your place at 9 o'clock. Oh, that's great. One more thing. Could you come a little earlier? Say 8:30? We need to discuss some details of the project before we start the day. No problem. I hung up the phone and thought about Jung Joon Ho's proposal again. Maybe I should have accepted it. But how would it affect my new job at Global Connections? Would I be able to be in 2 meetings at the same time? In the end, I decided to turn down the Korean's offer. A new job was more important than being able to rub my former boss' nose in it. I dialed Jung Joon Ho's number. Mr. Jong, I've thought about your offer and unfortunately I have to decline. I'm starting a new job tomorrow and won't be able to attend your meeting. It's a shame. I could really hear the disappointment in his voice. But I understand. Work comes first. If you change your mind or if you have some free time, let me know. I will. And good luck with the negotiations. Thank you. We're gonna need it, judging by the quality of the documents we received. After that conversation, I felt both relieved and vaguely uneasy. Perhaps I'd missed a good opportunity. But the decision had been made, and now it was time to focus on the new job. Before going to bed, I prepared everything I needed for my first day of work. I ironed my shirt, picked out my tie, and packed my briefcase. Then I set my alarm clock for 6:30 and went to bed, trying not to think about Michigan Greens, Co-Green, or Thorne Abbott. Monday morning began with the shrill ringing of the alarm clock. I jumped up, showered, had a quick breakfast, and was out the door by 7:55. It was about a 20-minute drive to the Global Connections office, so I should arrive just in time for the appointment. Getting into the car, I turned on the radio. The morning news was on. Weather, traffic, politics. Nothing of interest. I switched to a music station and concentrated on the road. Halfway through, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Orson. I pressed the speaker button. Orson, hi, I'm driving, so speak up. Aiden. I could hear the panic in his voice. I need you to come over here right now. What? Come where? What's wrong? The office. The meeting with the Koreans has turned into a disaster. They're ready to leave. I felt my heart start to beat faster. Calm down and tell the story in order. I heard Orson take a deep breath, trying to control his emotions. The meeting started at 8 in the morning. Everything was going well until Abbott started his presentation. Already on the third slide, Jung Joon Ho frowned and said something to his colleagues in Korean. They looked shocked, offended. I don't know exactly, but clearly not happy. What was in the presentation? The usual stuff, our mission, values, company history. But the translation, God, Aiden, that was awful. I don't know Korean, but even I could see something was wrong. And then they asked for copies of the contract, and that's when it got really bad. Jung Joon Ho read the first page and literally turned red. He said something to his assistant and he began to quickly flip through the document, highlighting some places. Then Choi stood up and said that they couldn't continue negotiations under these conditions. I cursed. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. Did he explain what the problem was? Yes, and that's the worst part. Orson's voice shook with excitement. It turns out that the translation of the contract is full of errors that completely change the meaning of the document. For example, in one place, instead of exclusive distribution rights, it was something like limited distribution capabilities. And in another, the payment terms looked like we were demanding payment for the entire contract at once. Shit. But that's not all. In the presentation, in the section on our mission statement, the phrase, "We seek a partnership based on mutual respect," somehow turned into, "We expect obedience to our standards." And that's just what Choi translated back for us. He said there were other problems, including language that is considered offensive in Korean culture. I closed my eyes for a second. typical machine translation mistakes, lack of understanding of context, cultural nuances, subtleties of language. How did Abbott react? At first, he tried to deny the problem. He said he was using state-of-the-art software and there could be no errors. Then he started accusing the Koreans of picking on the little things. Can you imagine? Unfortunately, I can imagine. Eventually, Jong said they were taking a time out until lunch to rethink the feasibility of cooperation. And they left. They just up and left. And Abbott is now running around the office yelling at everyone and demanding, "Fix the damn translation." I looked at my watch. 8:35. I was already late for my meeting with Robert Hayes. "Orson, I can't make it right now. I have an interview at another company." "Please, Aiden." There was desperation in his voice. Kirsty is about to cry. Marketing is in a panic, and Abbott seems close to a nervous breakdown. No one knows what to do. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and closed my eyes. A sense of duty fought resentment and common sense. Michigan Greens was no longer my company. I'd been laid off. I found a new job. And yet, "Give me 5 minutes," I finally said. I had to make a call. I dialed Global Connections. "Robert Hayes," a familiar voice answered. "Mr. Hayes, this is Aiden Farquhar. I'm afraid I've had an emergency. I may be a little late for our meeting." "Is it serious?" I hesitated. How do I explain the situation without sounding unprofessional? "My former employer urgently needs a Korean translation consultation. It's important to them." "I understand." I could hear the slight disappointment in Hayes's voice. "When can you be here?" "I'll try to be there by 10. "I'll try to make it by 10 o'clock. "Okay. I'll be waiting for you." I hung up and sighed. Then I dialed Orson again. "I'm on my way. I'll be there in about 20 minutes, but be warned, I can't stay long." "Thanks, Aiden." The relief in his voice was almost palpable. "You're a lifesaver." "No promises. And don't tell Abbott I'm coming. Just, find a way to stall the Koreans until I get there." I turned the car around and headed toward the Michigan Greens office, mentally going over possible scenarios. How would Abbott react to my appearance? Would he be able to rectify the situation? And what would happen to my new job if I was very late or didn't show up at all? But most importantly, how serious were the translation errors? According to Orson, it wasn't just inaccuracies but a complete distortion of meaning. Machine translation is good for understanding the general content of the text, but for documents where every word matters, it is catastrophically unreliable. Especially when it comes to languages as different as English and Korean, with their different grammatical structures, cultural contexts, and nuances of business etiquette. I parked in the parking lot in front of the office building and stood still for a second, looking at the familiar Michigan Greens logo. Just a few days ago, I was walking out of here with a box of stuff, sure I wouldn't be back. And here I am again. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and headed toward the entrance. The security guard, Paul, raised his eyebrows in surprise when he saw me. "Aiden? I didn't expect to see you." "Hey, Paul, I'm here by, invitation." He chuckled, but let me pass without further question. In the elevator, I ran into Jenny from sales. Her eyes widened in surprise. "Aiden! Oh, thank God! Did you hear what's going on?" Orson called me. "It's a disaster. The Koreans are furious. Abbott's on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Everyone's running around like headless chickens. Is there anything you can do?" "We'll see," I replied cautiously. The elevator doors opened and I stepped into a familiar corridor. The office was chaotic, with people scurrying between departments, people typing feverishly on computers, and people talking loudly on the phone. The atmosphere was like a headquarters in the middle of a crisis. Orson spotted me first and rushed toward me. "Aiden! Finally!" He grabbed my hand. "They're in conference room B. They said they're giving us until 11 to file the correct paperwork." After that, they're leaving for the airport. And Abbott? In his office, trying to calm down. Kirsty is with him. At that moment, Abbott's office door swung open and Kirsty came flying out, wiping her eyes. When she saw me, she froze. Aiden? Are you here? Her voice shook. Orson called, I explained. Said you were having trouble with the transfer. That's an understatement, she shook her head. It's much worse than we thought. The Koreans take some phrases as direct insults. And the terms of the contract, their lawyer said he'd never seen such an aggressive and one-sided document. Let me see it. Kirsty quickly pulled several sheets of paper out of a folder. Here's the presentation and the draft contract. Both machine translated into Korean. I took a quick glance at the documents and wrinkled my nose. Even without being a professional translator, you could see the obvious problems. Some technical words had been translated literally, without regard for context. The formalities so important in Korean business communication had been completely ignored. In some places, the text was just a meaningless collection of words. It's a disaster, I said. Who did this translation? A new program Abbott bought with a lot of money. Kirsty sighed. He was so sure of its effectiveness. At that moment, Thorne Abbott himself came out of the office. His perfectly styled hair was disheveled, his tie was loose, and his face was a mixture of rage and despair. When he saw me, he froze. Farquhar? What the hell are you doing here? I invited him, Kirsty interjected quickly. We're in a desperate situation, Thorne. We need professional help. Abbott glared, but to my surprise, he didn't explode. What do you suggest? He asked, addressing me in a tone of ill-concealed irritation. I need to see the original English documents and your machine translation, and I'll need a quiet place to work. We don't have much time. Abbott hesitated, clearly struggling with his own pride. Finally, he nodded. Use my office. Kirsty, give him everything he needs. Then he turned to me. You have exactly 2 hours, Farquhar. If there's no result by 11 o'clock. He did not finish his sentence, but the threat was clear. What threat could there be to a man who had already been fired? I'll do my best, I said dryly, and headed for the office. The Global Connections office was located in a modern business center on the opposite side of town. The glass facade, the spotlessly clean lobby, the courteous security guard at the entrance, everything spoke of a stable and successful company. I nervously adjusted my tie before stepping into the elevator. Despite the urgent help from Michigan Greens, I managed to arrive at my new job only a little late 9:20. I was greeted at the front desk by a friendly young woman who introduced herself as Amanda. Mr. Farquhar, Mr. Hayes is waiting for you in his office. Let me show you in. Robert Hayes' office was a bright room with panoramic windows and minimalist design. Hayes himself, a middle-aged man with graying temples and lively brown eyes, greeted me with a handshake. Glad you made it, Mr. Farquhar. Is everything all right with your counseling? His voice was a mixture of curiosity and mild displeasure. I've decided to be as honest as possible. Almost. My former employer needed urgent translation assistance for an important negotiation. The situation was critical. I understand. Hayes nodded, gesturing for me to sit down. Such situations often arise in our field. I hope you were able to help, to a certain extent, although the final result is still unknown. Hayes smiled. Well, let's talk about your work here. As I mentioned, we need a translator to work with Korean suppliers. The next hour was spent discussing my duties, my schedule, and the projects I had to work on. Global Connections was importing electronic components from South Korea and needed someone who could not only translate documentation, but also help with negotiations in a culturally sensitive manner. We tried to use freelancers, but the quality left a lot to be desired, Hayes explained. One incorrect translation of a technical specification cost us tens of thousands of dollars and a damaged relationship with a supplier. I couldn't help but think of the situation at Michigan Greens. History was repeating itself, only with different actors. Was the machine translation failing too? I asked. Hayes laughed. We tried it. The result was amusing, especially when it came to business ethics. No, serious business requires someone who understands not only the language but also the culture. We finished talking, and Hayes took me to meet his colleagues. The Global Connections team was young and energetic. Everyone greeted me kindly, especially when they heard about my experience working with Asian partners. By noon, I was already sitting at my new desk, dealing with my first task, translating the specifications for a new line of microprocessors. The work was interesting. My colleagues were pleasant and the atmosphere was calm and businesslike. Everything was perfect, and yet I couldn't concentrate fully. My thoughts kept returning to Michigan Greens, to the chaos I'd left behind a few hours ago. Had they managed to fix the translation? Had the meeting with the Koreans taken place? Was Abbott able to overcome his pride and admit the mistake? I checked my phone. No calls, no messages. That could mean both good and bad news. At 13:30, I went to lunch with my new co-workers. We chose a small cafe not far from the office. As I stood in line for a sandwich, the phone in my pocket vibrated. I looked at the screen. Kirsty waits. "Excuse me, I need to take this," I said to my colleagues and stepped aside. "Kirsty?" "Aiden." Her voice sounded desperate. "We need your help. Again." I sighed. "What happened?" "We tried to use your fixes, but it was too late. The Koreans had already seen the original documents and said they couldn't trust a company that was so careless with communication." "So now what?" "They're flying out tomorrow morning. This is our last chance." I felt my heart start to beat faster. Last chance for what? Abbott admitted his mistake. I could hear the surprise in her voice. For the first time in my memory, he agreed that we needed a professional translator. He wants you to meet unofficially with Young Min Ho tonight. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the situation. On the one hand, I had just been fired from this company. On the other hand, I still felt responsible for the project I had been working on for 3 years. What exactly was required of me? Just talk to them, explain the situation, apologize for the misunderstanding, maybe smooth things over enough for them to agree to another meeting. And Abbott? Will he be present? No, Kirsty hesitated. He thinks his presence will only complicate things. It'll be an informal meeting, just you and the Korean delegation. I grinned. Abbott avoided admitting his mistake in person. Typical. And where is this supposed to take place? At the Seoul Garden restaurant at 19 o'clock. It's a Korean restaurant downtown. At least the location was right. It was a step up from Abbott's original idea of inviting Koreans to a steakhouse. I'll think about it, Kirsty. I'll call you back in an hour. I returned to my colleagues, but my appetite was gone. My thoughts revolved around Kirsty's suggestion. Should I have interfered? Wouldn't it look strange to my new employer? And most importantly, had Abbott really admitted his mistake, or was it just a desperation tactic? After lunch, I went back to work, but I couldn't concentrate. At 15 o'clock, I decided to talk to Robert Hayes. I knocked on his office door. "Mr. Hayes, do you have a minute?" "Sure, Aiden. Come in." I briefly explained the situation, trying to be as honest as possible, but without getting into the inner workings of Michigan Greens. My former employer needs help with their Korean partners. They're asking me to have an informal meeting tonight. I realize this may seem strange on my first day of work here. Hayes rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "How important are these Korean partners to your former employer?" "Very important. This could be a deal that could determine the future of the company." "And they approached you specifically, even though they fired you a few days ago?" I nodded. Well, Hayes smiled. That says more about your professionalism than any recommendation. Go to that meeting, Aiden. Think of it as your first assignment from Global Connections to maintain good relationships with potential partners. Thank you for understanding. I was relieved. Don't thank me. Business is first and foremost about relationships between people, and I'm glad to see that you understand that. I went back to my desk and called Kirsty. I'm in. I'll be at the Soul Garden at 19 o'clock. Thank you, Aiden. She sounded genuinely relieved. You don't know how important this is to us. But I have a condition, I added. I want to talk to Jung Min Ho beforehand without intermediaries. And, Kirsty, I'm not doing this for Abbott. I'm doing it for the company I've invested 3 years of my life in. I know, Aiden. Abbott knows too, though he'll never admit it. After the talk, I went back to translating the specs, but my mind was elsewhere. What am I going to tell Jung Min Ho? How will I explain the situation? How will I get him to trust Michigan Greens again after such a fiasco? At 17 o'clock, as the workday at Global Connections drew to a close, I called Jung Min Ho. Mr. Farquhar, came a voice with a slight accent. Miss Waits said you wanted to talk to me before our meeting. I switched to Korean. Yes, Mr. Jong. Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. First of all, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding that happened today. There was a short pause, then Jong also spoke Korean. I appreciate your apology, Mr. Farquhar, but I must confess that today's meeting left me with an unpleasant impression. I understand and fully share your feelings. The documents you received were translated by an automatic system without a professional translator. It was a serious error. Yes, Miss Waits mentioned that. She also said that you were a staff translator for Michigan Greens until recently. That's correct, until last week. And now they're asking you to help them rectify the situation? I could hear the irony in his voice. I've decided to be completely candid. Yes, that's exactly right. I said yes because I've been working on this project for 3 years and I believe in its potential. Michigan Greens is a good company with quality products. Unfortunately, the new management made a serious mistake in assessing the importance of cultural communication. Chan was silent for a moment, then said, I appreciate your honesty, Mr. Farquhar, and your respect for our language and culture. Let's meet at the Soul Garden and continue the conversation. Perhaps not all is lost. Thank you for your understanding, Mr. Jong. I'll see you at 19 o'clock. After the call, I felt cautiously optimistic. At least Jung Min Ho was willing to listen. That was already more than I expected. I sent a text to Kirsty. Talk to Chan. He's agreed to meet. There's hope. Her reply came instantly. Thanks, Aiden. Keep me posted. At 18:30, I was already outside the Soul Garden restaurant. It was in the center of the city and was famous for its authentic Korean cuisine. I decided to come early to get ready and refresh my memory on the details of the project. The receptionist escorted me to a reserved table in a quiet corner of the restaurant. I ordered tea and started going through the notes on my phone. I needed to be ready for any questions. At 19 o'clock exactly, the doors of the restaurant opened and a group of 4 people walked in. Jung Min Ho was easily recognizable from the photos I had seen earlier, a tall man with impeccable posture. Next to him were 2 younger men, probably assistants, and a middle-aged woman with a tablet in her hands, probably a translator. I stood up as they approached the table and bowed. Annyeong haseyo, Jung Min Ho sajangnim, manaseo bangab seubnida. Hello, Mr. Director Jung Min Ho. It's a pleasure to meet you. Jong replied with a tilt of his head. Annyeong haseyo pakwasi, hangugeoreol ajujal hasineyo. Hello, Mr. Farquhar. You speak Korean very well. Gamsahabnida, Anju Sijo. Thank you. Please have a seat. We sat down at the table. I introduced myself to the rest of the delegation, to Jeong's assistants, Park Ji-hoon and Lee Sung-min, and to Kim Mi-young, the translator. After the waiter took the drink order, Jong got down to business. Mr. Farquhar, I appreciate your initiative to organize this meeting, but I must say that today's events have caused us to seriously question the feasibility of working with Michigan Greens. I nodded. I fully understand your doubts, Mr. Jong. What happened today is inexcusable. The translation of documents was done without due attention to cultural nuances and business etiquette. It's not just about etiquette, Park Ji-hoon interjected. The text was translated in a way that completely changed the meaning of the agreement. It seemed unconscionable. I assure you that it wasn't intentional, I replied. It was the result of over-reliance on automatic translation systems that are unable to take into account the context and nuances of business communication. The waiter brought drinks and took my food order. I purposely chose traditional Korean dishes, showing my respect for their culture. After the waiter left, Chan looked at me thoughtfully. Mr. Farquhar, let me ask you a direct question. Why don't you work at Michigan Greens anymore? I hesitated. How frank was I supposed to be? In the end, I decided honesty would be the best strategy. The new CEO, Mr. Abbott, decided to streamline the company's costs. One of his measures was to replace in-house interpreters with automated translation systems. He believed they would do the job just as well and cost the company less. Lee Sung-min couldn't hold back a chuckle. I nodded. Yes, it was a mistake, one that he now admits to. It's convenient to admit mistakes when the deal is on the rocks, Park Ji-hoon said skeptically. I agree, I replied. And I'm not trying to justify Mr. Abbott's decision. I'm not here to defend his actions, but to defend a project in which I've put 3 years of work. Chan watched me carefully. Do you really believe in this project even though you were fired? Yes, I answered without hesitation. Michigan Greens produces quality organic produce that I am sure will be in demand in the Korean market. And Co-Green has an excellent reputation as a distributor of premium organic products in Korea. This partnership is beneficial to both parties despite misunderstandings. Let's say we agree to another meeting. What will change? Does Mr. Abbott still think machine translation is sufficient? No, I shook my head. Today's events have convinced him of the need for professional translation. He is ready to bring in a specialist to prepare all the documents and participate in the negotiations. You? Chan asked bluntly. I smiled. That would be ideal, but I already work for another company. However, I can recommend some excellent translators who can do the job just as well as I can. Chan nodded thoughtfully. I see. Still, it's strange that a company would fire a specialist and then ask for his help. Business is not always logical, Mr. Chan, I replied. This remark caused all the Koreans to smile approvingly. Park Ji-hoon even laughed quietly. We're willing to give Michigan Greens another chance, Jong said slowly, on one condition. I'm listening. You must be present at the negotiations, not necessarily as an official representative of Michigan Greens. You can be an independent consultant, but I need someone I can trust to make sure there are no further, misunderstandings. I hesitated. It was an unexpected condition. On the one hand, I was already working at Global Connections. On the other, it was just one meeting, maybe 2. Robert Hayes had already shown his understanding by allowing me to go to this meeting. Perhaps he'll agree to that? I will try to arrange it, Mr. Chan, I finally answered. But I can't promise for sure. I need to coordinate it with my new employer. Of course, Chan nodded. Let me know by noon tomorrow. We'll stay in town for another day if we get a favorable response from you. Thank you for your understanding. We exchanged business cards, an important ritual in Korean business culture. I accepted and passed the cards with both hands with a slight bow, as etiquette required. As dinner drew to a close, Chung Min-ho rose. It has been a pleasant evening, Mr. Farquhar. Regardless of how our cooperation with Michigan Greens turns out, I hope we can maintain personal contact. I am honored, Mr. Chan. I stood up and bowed as well. We walked out of the restaurant together. Before getting into the cab, Chan shook my hand once more. I look forward to your call tomorrow. I thank you for your sincerity. It's a rare quality in today's business. After they left, I was left standing on the sidewalk, contemplating the situation. The meeting went better than I expected. The Koreans were willing to give Michigan Greens a second chance. But the price of that chance was unusual: my presence at the negotiations. I pulled out my phone and texted Kirsty. The meeting went well. They are willing to continue negotiations, but on one condition. We'll talk tomorrow morning. Her reply came a few seconds later. Thank you, Aiden. You're a real lifesaver. What's the condition? Tomorrow, Kirsty. I've got some things to think about. I hailed a cab and drove home, pondering how to explain the situation to Robert Hayes, and whether I even wanted to deal with Thorne Abbott again, even as an independent consultant. But most of all, about what this partnership, which I had prepared so long and carefully, meant to me. Was it worth another chance? Tuesday morning began with a phone call. I had just had my first cup of coffee when my smartphone screen flashed the name Kirsty Waits. Good morning, I answered, trying to sound upbeat despite my lack of sleep. Last night's dinner with the Korean delegation had dragged on, and afterward I was still mulling over their condition for a long time. Aiden! Kirsty's voice sounded excited. Tell me, how did the meeting go? What condition did they set? I took a deep breath. The meeting went well. We had dinner and talked. Jung-min Ho is a reasonable man. He understands that mistakes happen, and they're willing to continue negotiating? There was hope in her voice. Yes, but on one condition. They want me to be present at all negotiations, as an independent consultant or interpreter. There was silence on the line. Kirsty? I'm here, she answered after a pause. It's unexpected. Although if you think about it, it makes sense. The problem is that I work for a different company now, I reminded her. I'm not sure I want to go back to working with Abbott even temporarily. Aiden, please, she said, a pleading tone in her voice. This contract is very important to the company, for all of us. If the deal falls through, more layoffs could follow. I sighed. Kirsty knew what buttons to push. All right, I'll talk to my new boss. But no promises. Thank you, she exclaimed. One more thing. Abbott wants to meet with you. Tonight, if possible. Why? He didn't say. But I think it has something to do with the Korean's condition. When and where? At 11 in his office, if you can. I glanced at my watch. 8:30. I had time to stop by Global Connections, explain the situation to Robert Hayes, and then go to meet Abbott. Okay, I'll be there. The Global Connections office greeted me with a familiar business atmosphere. Despite the fact that I had only been working here for one day, my colleagues greeted me like an old acquaintance. Robert Hayes was in his office going through some paperwork. Aiden, he smiled when he saw me in the doorway. How was your meeting yesterday? Good. I walked in and closed the door behind me. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to him about. I briefed him on the situation, the successful dinner with the Koreans, their willingness to continue negotiations on the condition of my participation, the upcoming meeting with Abbott. Hayes listened attentively without interrupting. And what do you plan to do? He asked when I was finished. Honestly, I don't know. On the one hand, I feel responsible for this project. On the other hand, I'm already working here and I wouldn't want to let you down. Hayes tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. You know, Aiden, in business it's not just contracts that matter, it's relationships. The way you're acting right now says more about you than any resume. I was worried. Would he find my actions unprofessional? So, Hayes continued, I think you should help your former employer. Consider it an investment in your reputation. Is that okay with you? I was surprised. You don't mind? On the contrary, I'm in favor. It's your ability to build bridges between cultures that makes a specialist like you valuable. Put it into practice. But what about my work here? The key is to finish the project on time. You can work on it remotely. I'm very relieved. Thank you for understanding. Don't thank me, Hayes smiled. Just remember, in our business, reputation is everything. And from what I can see, you deserve it. With a light heart, I left for Michigan Greens. It's a strange feeling, coming back to the office you were fired from just a week ago. The security guard, Paul, greeted me as if nothing had happened, as if I had just returned from vacation. As I made my way up to the 4th floor, I ran into Orson. Aiden! He clapped me on the shoulder happily. I hear you're working miracles. Did the Koreans agree to meet again? Under certain conditions, I said evasively. How's Abbott? What's his mood? Orson frowned. It's hard to say. He's been locked in his office since this morning. Kirsty came in to see him and they talked for a long time. Then she came out looking like she'd won the lottery. Interesting. She said you were coming. Is that true? Are you coming back? I don't know yet, Orson. I need to talk to Abbott first. At 5 to 11, I knocked on the CEO's office door. Inside, I heard a sharp, "Come in." Thorne Abbott was sitting at his desk, impeccably dressed as always, but there was tension on his face. When I entered, he stood up, a gesture I hadn't expected. Mr. Farquhar, he pointed to the chair opposite, please sit down. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. Abbott returned to his chair. Miss Waits informed me of the results of your meeting with the Korean delegation yesterday, he began without preamble. I must admit I'm impressed. You were able to rectify a situation that seemed hopeless. I just talked to them honestly, I replied. Jung Min-ho is a reasonable man. He realizes that mistakes happen. Abbott wrinkled his nose slightly at the word mistakes. Yes, as for that, he coughed. I may have underestimated the complexity of cross-cultural communication and the role of the human factor in it. It was the closest thing to an apology one could expect from Thorne Abbott. Miss Waits also reported a condition the Koreans have set, he continued. They want you to participate in the negotiations. That's right. Therefore, Abbott straightened in his chair, I would like to suggest that you return to Michigan Greens, to your former position. I shook my head slowly. I'm afraid that's not possible. Abbott frowned. Why? Do you already have a job? Yes, I have a job at Global Connections. There was a pause. Abbott drummed his fingers on the table. I'll help you negotiate with Chung Min-ho as an independent consultant. Abbott thought for a moment, then nodded. What fee do you want for the consultation? I said the amount was twice my previous monthly salary. Abbott grimaced, but didn't argue. Okay, when can you start? I've already started, I replied. Last night's dinner was the first step. Now we need to prepare for the formal negotiations. I'll draw up a plan and send it to you tonight. Good. Abbott held out his hand. I'm glad we've come to an agreement. I shook his hand, keeping my expression neutral. It wasn't a victory, but a truce. And I wasn't about to relax. Walking out of the office, I ran into Kirsty. She was waiting in the hallway, nervously tugging at the hem of her blouse. What's up? She asked in a whisper. I'll advise on the negotiations with the Koreans, I answered, and then we'll see. The next 3 days flew by like a blur. I was torn between preparing for the negotiations with the Koreans and completing a project for Global Connections. Fortunately, Robert Hayes was an understanding boss and allowed me a flexible schedule. I completely reworked the Michigan Greens presentation, corrected any errors in the contract translation, and conducted several training sessions for the team that was to be involved in the negotiations. Abbott, to my surprise, listened attentively to my recommendations, and even took notes. On Friday, a crucial meeting was scheduled with the Co-Green delegation. I arrived at the Michigan Greens office 2 hours before the start time to check all the details. The conference room was impeccably prepared, with every nuance of Korean business etiquette taken into account. Abbott showed up an hour before the meeting, dressed in a strict navy blue suit. "Is everything ready?" he asked, looking around the room. "Yes," I nodded. "Remember what we talked about. Formality and respect are key. No familiarity, no jokes, and let me do the negotiating when it comes to cultural nuances." He nodded, though I could see he was having a hard time giving up control. The Co-Green delegation arrived exactly at the appointed time, 10 in the morning. Jong Min-ho, his assistants Park and Lee, and lawyer and translator Kim Mi-young. I met them in the lobby and escorted them to the conference room where Abbott, Kirsty, and key Michigan Greens department heads were already waiting. After a formal exchange of greetings and business cards, a ritual I had carefully explained to the Michigan Greens team, everyone took their seats. I sat between Abbott and Chan, ready to mediate. "Mr. Chan," Abbott began in a surprisingly formal manner, "first of all, I would like to apologize for the misunderstanding that occurred during our previous meeting. It was an unforgivable mistake on our part." I translated his words, adding a few traditional Korean expressions to make the apology more sincere in Chan's eyes. Jong Min-ho nodded. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Abbott, and thank you for finding a solution to the problem." He cast a glance in my direction. The negotiations went well. After the contract was signed, I watched Abbott and Jung Min-ho shaking hands, and I was overcome with a strange feeling, not triumph, but rather the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. The 3 years of my life invested in this project had finally borne fruit, but the irony of the situation didn't escape me. I had to leave so they would realize my value. I knew now that I would never again allow my work to be undervalued by reducing it to a mere translation of words. My real value was in building bridges between cultures. In the end, perhaps quitting was a blessing. It made everyone, including myself, realize that in the world of global business, understanding each other means more than the most sophisticated translation technology.